Daniel Reyes never expected a flood to destroy more than just his home. The water rose past midnight, swallowing furniture, photographs. By morning the entire first floor was a ruined, reeking mess of debris. Daniel stood barefoot in the mud, staring at what remained of his life. His wife Maria gripped his arm, her eyes red from exhaustion and worry. Their daughter Sophia clutched a soaked stuffed rabbit, too stunned to cry anymore. Daniel had served 2 tours overseas before settling into this quiet little neighborhood. He believed Cedar Hollow Estates would finally give his family a peaceful life. Instead, the flood became only the beginning of a much deeper nightmare. Insurance adjusters approved repairs, and contractors started rebuilding the damaged porch and siding. Within days, stamped with the HOA logo. It was a formal violation notice, demanding immediate cessation of all construction work. Cheryl Whitfield, the HOA president, claimed his renovation violated strict community design guidelines. Daniel stared at the letter, confusion turning quickly into simmering frustration and disbelief. He had emergency flood damage, not some unauthorized cosmetic upgrade to his house. He called the HOA office, hoping for understanding, compassion. Instead, Cheryl answered coldly, repeating rules about approved paint colors and matching shutters. Daniel explained the situation, his voice tight with controlled, simmering exhaustion and anger. Cheryl interrupted him, insisting rules applied equally, regardless of personal circumstances or hardship. Something about her tone felt sharper, colder, bureaucratic enforcement. Daniel later learned Cheryl had opposed his family moving into the neighborhood originally. She had whispered comments about veterans, disability ramps, and lowered property values nearby. Neighbors quietly confirmed Cheryl disliked anyone who seemed different from her preferred image. Daniel swallowed his anger, focusing instead on protecting his family and rebuilding their home. He resumed construction carefully, documenting every permit, inspection. Days later, photographing his property with aggressive, exaggerated disapproval. She left another violation notice, threatening daily fines until full compliance was achieved. Maria watched from the window, her hands trembling with growing fear and frustration. Sophia asked quietly why the angry lady kept yelling about their broken house. Daniel knelt beside her, promising everything would eventually be okay again. Somehow, that night he barely slept, replaying every confrontation, every accusation, every cold stare. He researched HOA bylaws, discovering emergency repairs were explicitly exempt from standard approval. Armed with this knowledge, Daniel requested an official meeting with the entire HOA board. Cheryl denied his request, claiming the board calendar was completely full for months. Daniel sensed she was deliberately blocking him from presenting evidence or asking questions. His neighbor, an older widow, noticed the tension building across the street. Linda had lived in Cedar Hollow for 15 years. Watching Cheryl grow increasingly controlling, she approached Daniel quietly, offering support and warning him about Cheryl's history of intimidation. Linda mentioned previous families who left after enduring similar harassment and unfair treatment. Daniel felt a strange mixture of relief and renewed anger hearing her story. He wasn't imagining things. And he certainly wasn't the only victim of this abuse. Determined now. Email. Notice. He photographed his porch repairs alongside identical renovations approved for other neighbors. The double standard became painfully obvious once he compared the documented evidence carefully. Other homeowners had renovated freely. Yet only Daniel faced relentless fines and threats. Cheryl seemed to target him specifically, ignoring violations committed by her personal friends. Daniel felt his patience finally crack beneath the weight of constant unfair treatment. He decided enough was enough. And silence would no longer protect his family. That evening, formal complaint against the HOA. Maria read it over his shoulder, her exhaustion slowly turning into fierce determination. Sophia hugged them both tightly without fully understanding why. Daniel mailed the complaint the next morning, demanding fair treatment and an explanation. Cheryl's response arrived swiftly, dismissive, and utterly unapologetic in every sentence. She insisted Daniel was simply causing unnecessary drama over reasonable community design standards. Daniel realized then that negotiation alone would never resolve this growing injustice. He needed something stronger. Something undeniable. Something capable of forcing real accountability. That night, he found something unexpected and deeply troubling. An email from Cheryl, accidentally forwarded, revealed her true intentions toward his family. She had written to another board member, calling Daniel's family unwanted, troublesome outsiders. The words, "those people," appeared clearly, dripping with thinly disguised prejudice and contempt. Daniel's hands shook as he read the message twice. Then a third time. This wasn't about rules. Paint colors. All. This was personal. And deeply wrong on every possible level. Daniel forwarded the email to himself, securing it carefully as crucial future evidence. He told Maria everything, watching her expression shift from shock into quiet fury. "They can't get away with this," Maria whispered, gripping the kitchen counter tightly. Daniel nodded slowly, already imagining the long fight that now lay ahead. He had survived combat zones, floods, but never this kind of betrayal. Still, refusing to back down from this fight. The next morning, threatening legal action over continued construction. Daniel read it carefully, then placed it beside the damning email he'd discovered. He realized the HOA wasn't just bullying him anymore. They were preparing to sue. A cold knot formed in his stomach, mixed with unexpected, burning determination. If Cheryl wanted a legal fight, Daniel decided he would absolutely give her one. He picked up his phone and dialed a lawyer recommended by a fellow veteran. The call connected. Or speaking the truth. The lawyer, Sha Coleman, listened carefully without interrupting once. Daniel explained the flood, the renovations, the notices. Patricia's expression shifted from professional neutrality into focused, determined interest and concern. "This isn't just harassment," she said slowly. "This could be actionable discrimination too." Daniel felt a strange mixture of relief and renewed nervousness hearing those words. Patricia requested copies of everything. Every email. Every photograph collected. She promised to review state HOA laws regarding emergency repairs and protected classes. Within days. Lawsuit against Daniel for violations. Cheryl had convinced the board to pursue legal action, framing Daniel as defiant. The lawsuit demanded immediate compliance, financial penalties, and reimbursement for legal expenses incurred. Maria read the court papers with trembling hands, fear mixing with growing anger. Sophia asked again why the lady wanted to take their house away completely. Daniel hugged her tightly, promising they would never lose their home. Ever. Patricia reviewed the lawsuit thoroughly, finding multiple procedural errors and unsupported legal claims. She explained that emergency repairs were clearly protected under state and local law. More importantly, powerful evidence of unlawful motive entirely. Patricia suggested filing a countersuit, seeking damages for harassment and intentional discrimination. Daniel hesitated initially, worried about costs, stress. Patricia reassured him gently, explaining contingency arrangements and the strength of his evidence. Maria squeezed his hand, whispering that justice mattered more than avoiding discomfort. Daniel finally agreed, signing the paperwork to formally countersue the entire HOA board. News spread quickly through Cedar Hollow, neighbors whispering about the unfolding legal battle. Linda offered to testify about Cheryl's history of selective enforcement. Other neighbors began quietly sharing their own stories of mistreatment. One family described being fined for a wheelchair ramp Cheryl deemed unsightly. Another described harassment after installing solar panels Cheryl personally found objectionable. Patricia compiled these testimonies, building a powerful pattern of discriminatory, abusive behavior. Cheryl doubled down publicly, insisting Daniel was simply troublesome. She held an emergency HOA meeting, painting herself as the neighborhood's defender. Daniel attended despite the hostility, sitting quietly while Cheryl spoke against him. She accused him of disrespecting community standards and threatening property values for everyone. Daniel waited patiently, his composure firm despite the unfair, exaggerated accusations against him. When given the floor, he calmly presented documented evidence of selective enforcement practices. He showed photographs comparing his renovations to unapproved work by Cheryl's friends. The room grew silent as neighbors began recognizing the troubling, obvious double standard. Then Daniel revealed the discriminatory email, reading it aloud without raising his voice. Gasps rippled through the room as Cheryl's composed expression instantly crumbled completely. She stammered, entirely out of proper context. But the damage was done, and her credibility shattered before the entire neighborhood. Linda stood up, witnessing Cheryl's selective, unfair enforcement firsthand. Other neighbors followed, adding their voices to the growing chorus of complaints. Cheryl's allies on the board exchanged uncomfortable glances, sensing the meeting slipping away. One board member quietly admitted feeling pressured to support unfair decisions previously. Daniel watched the tide turning, though he refused to celebrate prematurely just yet. The lawsuit still loomed, and Cheryl remained determined to fight until the end. Patricia warned him that legal battles often grew uglier before reaching final resolution. Sure enough, motions, attempting to delay and intimidate. Daniel felt exhaustion creeping in, the stress affecting his sleep and his patience. Maria noticed the toll it took, encouraging him to rest whenever possible. Sophia drew pictures of their house, insisting they would win and stay forever. Those small drawings became Daniel's quiet motivation during the most difficult, draining nights. Patricia continued building their case, gathering expert testimony about housing discrimination patterns nationwide. She found precedent cases where HOAs faced significant penalties for similar discriminatory behavior. Confidence grew within Daniel's legal team as the evidence continued mounting steadily. Meanwhile, desperate, attempting to discredit witnesses and intimidate neighbors privately. She visited Linda's home, pressuring her to retract previous statements made publicly. Linda refused firmly, later reporting the encounter directly to Daniel's legal team. This new intimidation attempt only strengthened their case, demonstrating Cheryl's continued abusive behavior. Patricia filed additional motions, highlighting witness intimidation as further proof of misconduct. The court scheduled a formal hearing, setting a date that felt both terrifying and exciting. Daniel spent sleepless nights preparing testimony, reviewing documents, and steadying his nerves. Maria reminded him constantly that truth and evidence remained firmly on their side. The morning of the hearing arrived, gray skies matching Daniel's nervous, tightened stomach. He dressed carefully, pinning his old service medal quietly onto his jacket. Maria kissed him gently, whispering that their family's strength had brought them this far. Sophia hugged him tightly, telling him to be brave like always before. Daniel walked into the courthouse, Patricia beside him, evidence folders held firmly. Cheryl arrived separately, her expression rigid, defiant than before. Neighbors filled the gallery, many having traveled simply to witness the proceedings unfold. The judge entered, practiced, measured authority. Daniel took a deep breath, knowing everything now depended on the coming hours. The hearing began with Cheryl's lawyer presenting the original HOA complaint forcefully. He argued Daniel violated community standards, deserving fines and immediate compliance penalties. Patricia rose calmly, requesting permission to present clear, overwhelming counter-evidence instead. The judge nodded, presented timeline carefully. Patricia presented state law explicitly exempting emergency flood repairs from standard approval processes. She showed photographs proving identical renovations approved freely for Cheryl's personal friends. Gasps echoed quietly as the obvious double standard became undeniably clear again. Then Patricia introduced the discriminatory email, reading its contents aloud deliberately and clearly. The judge's expression hardened, recognizing immediately the troubling implications behind those words. Cheryl's lawyer objected weakly, but the judge overruled, allowing full evidentiary consideration. Linda testified next, describing years of selective enforcement and quiet, Persistent intimidation. Another neighbor described unfair fines over a wheelchair ramp built for accessibility. A third neighbor recounted harassment following Cheryl's personal objection to solar panels installed. Pattern after pattern emerged, painting a damning portrait of abuse and prejudice. Cheryl's composure finally broke, her voice rising defensively as she tried explaining herself. She insisted she only enforced rules fairly, despite mounting evidence proving otherwise completely. The judge questioned her directly about the discriminatory emails troubling explicit language. Cheryl hesitated, stumbling over excuses that satisfied absolutely no one in the courtroom. Daniel watched quietly, his heart pounding as years of injustice finally surfaced publicly. Patricia then presented Daniel's military service record, highlighting his sacrifice and community contributions. She argued Cheryl specifically targeted him due to prejudice against veterans and outsiders. The judge listened intently, clearly moved by the depth of documented mistreatment. After both sides concluded, the judge called a brief recess for deliberation. Daniel sat motionless, Maria gripping his hand tightly beneath the wooden table. Sophia whispered prayers she'd learned from her grandmother. Minutes felt like hours as the courtroom waited in heavy, anxious silence. Finally, her expression firm and noticeably resolute and decisive, she dismissed the HOA's original lawsuit entirely, calling it baseless and procedurally flawed. Then she ruled decisively in Daniel's favor on every countersuit claim presented. She awarded Daniel $100,000 in damages for discrimination and harassment. The courtroom erupted in quiet gasps, followed by scattered, relieved applause throughout. Cheryl sat frozen, her face pale. As the verdict's weight finally registered completely, the judge further ordered Cheryl removed immediately from her HOA leadership position permanently. Additional sanctions required mandatory diversity training for the entire remaining HOA board. Daniel exhaled deeply, tears finally falling after months of relentless, exhausting pressure. Maria embraced him tightly, whispering that their fight had truly been worth everything. Sophia ran forward, hugging her father's legs, finally understanding they were safe now. Neighbors surrounded them, offering congratulations, apologies, overdue support. Linda smiled warmly, telling Daniel his courage had finally broken years of suffocating silence. Cheryl left the courthouse alone, avoiding eyes from neighbors who once respected her. Within weeks, she moved away from Cedar Hollow. Her once powerful reputation crumbled entirely, replaced by whispered stories of disgrace. The HOA board adopted fairer policies protecting future homeowners equally. Daniel used part of his settlement to finish renovating their home beautifully. Neighbors gathered for a small celebration, marking both recovery and long-awaited justice. Sophia proudly showed friends her bedroom, finally restored after the devastating flood damage. Maria planted flowers along their porch, symbolizing new beginnings after painful, difficult struggles. Daniel stood outside one evening, watching sunset colors paint their rebuilt home softly. He thought about how silence almost allowed injustice to continue unchecked indefinitely. Standing up had ultimately protected his family's future. Linda joined him outside, thanking him for inspiring other neighbors to speak honestly. Daniel smiled. A symbol of quiet community resistance. Word of the case spread beyond Cedar Hollow, inspiring other homeowners facing similar injustices. Patricia later told Daniel his case had already influenced ongoing HOA policy debates nationwide. Daniel felt humbled, knowing his fight had created something larger than himself alone. Sophia would later tell people her father taught her true courage. She remembered watching him stand tall against fear, prejudice. Maria often reflected that the flood, though devastating, ultimately revealed unexpected inner strength. Their family emerged closer, stronger. Justice finally served properly. Daniel kept the discriminatory email printed, framed quietly as a reminder of resilience. He never sought revenge, only fairness, accountability. Years later, where fairness and respect finally flourished, the story became local legend. A reminder that bullies eventually face real consequences. Daniel often told Sophia that justice sometimes arrives slowly, but it always arrives. Standing against abuse of power, he believed, called sacrifice. And in that rebuilt home, surrounded by love, their family finally found lasting peace.